everybody? This is Shay coming back at y'all with another episode of the Emmaus proposition. Man, it's been so good going on this journey with y'all, getting my thoughts out there and really expressing how anything we do, man, this is what we do at the Emmaus proposition. We take anything you can think of, whether it be culture or music, sports, entertainment, whatever it is, we take that, we chop it up, we process it, and we show each other how it all leads back to Christ. We believe here that everything in all of existence is from him, and through him, and to him. Jesus gets all the glory, and we're happy to do it, man. We're happy to get a chance to talk about all these things that are going on in life, all of our likes and dislikes. And this is not just me, man. Y'all get a chance to go on this journey with me because maybe this conversation sparks something in you where you take the things that are going on around you, life, culture, art, what have you, and point your way back to Christ through your various conversations with the people around you, or maybe just in your own self-reflection, man, so that you could just give God praise and glory as you go throughout your life. So that's what we do here. That's our aim. That's our goal. It's been super fun so far, man. Still trying to get the word out there, man. Y'all let people know what we're doing out here, and we'll keep it cracking. Today, I wanted to talk to y'all about one of my favorite movies of all time. So that's a high proposition, right? I would say, this is me, one of the best movies ever made. And granted, y'all check this out. I grew up in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? Like I was born in 78. So my growing up time as a youngling was during the 80s. And the 80s was weird. There's no getting around it, man. We had Prince, we had Cyndi Lauper. It was a wild time, man. People were after self-expression. They were coming out of the 60s where it was they were coming out of the 50s where it was like, you know, you still had some semblance of an intact family. You got to the 60s and it was the free love movement. You got to the 70s and they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to bounce back. You got the 80s and the 80s just went buck wild, man. And so you had a lot of the 80s that you had the rise of hip hop during the 80s. You had a good deal of world problems like AIDS hit the scene really hard. So people were trying to figure that out. We had to do a thing called We Are the World where everybody around the world tried to hold hands. I don't know if y'all remember that summer. Everybody in the world tried to hold hands and we were I think it was the fight to stop AIDS or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember what it was. I was a young dude, but a lot of stuff went on in the 80s, man. And we had what else did we have? Like we had Michael Jackson was big and Prince was big. The 80s brought y'all the Goonies. I know y'all remember that. Some of the best cartoons of all time. And we can go through that at a later episode because I promise y'all, the 80s had the best cartoons. And the 80s was just fly, man. Like we grew up and all of us kids, we were impacted by the 80s, and really, I don't think the world has recovered from the 80s, man. The way that hip hop came on the scene in the 80s, it just took the world by storm, and it changed everything, man. It changed country music, it changed pop music, it kind of changed rock music in a way because you had like Run DMC and Aerosmith. Like the way that black culture hit the scene in the 80s was something. It hit the world stage and it went crazy. And so growing up in that comes along this movie. It comes out in 1985, right? 1985, I was 7 years old, little snot-nosed, little booger running around and trying to figure out life. And really this movie set a precedence for really how I continue to approach life, even some extent to this day. Some of the stuff that I saw in this movie, some of the interactions that I saw, continues on to this day. And so the movie I'm talking about is The Last Dragon. Ugh, The Last Dragon. If y'all have never had the privilege of going back and seeing a 1980s gem of a movie, go back and watch The Last Dragon. Obviously, it's the 80s. Obviously, there's some cheese that's going on, as with most 80s movies. But man, storyline, for it coming out, it wasn't a major, like, it didn't have all the major Hollywood stars or anything like that. It was just a movie that came out from nowhere, and I promise you, it's one of those cult classics to this day. So here's my spoiler alert. I'm gonna put it in the description. I'm gonna tell y'all now. If you haven't watched it, I'm about to spoil the movie for you. But you should still go back and watch it because it was a really good movie, right? So, 1985, kung fu movies were big in the inner city. I'm saying that because not that I lived in a place that had like an overture of a lot of like kung fu theaters and stuff like that, but just looking at how kung fu movies influenced the culture in places like New York and LA, stuff like that, you can infer like how impactful some of those kung fu flicks were. And so in the 80s, kung fu movies were on like all the time. You had like the Five Fingers of Death that was out. You had I don't remember all the actors' names, but I remember sitting around watching some of these flicks and didn't understand a lick of what they were saying, but you knew they were about to kick some butt, right? So they're just going for it, and you got the sound effects like whoosh, 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 whoosh. And the moves, the cinematography, the choreography, all that kind of stuff. It was a good time in the 80s. And in places like New York, they used to rent out like theaters where you could go and watch kung fu movies. And so that sets the stage for this cultural revolution, right? So you had these kung fu movies that would come out, but you also had the influence of hip hop too. So you had b-boys that would break out some cardboard and they just start breakdancing. You had everybody was like, not everybody, it was for folks that could afford it. You carry around like a ghetto blaster, like you had a big boombox that'd be up on your shoulder. You put it down, y'all bust out some moves, and it was just this mix of people trying to figure out like who they were in the 80s, and it was weird fashion and all kind of stuff, right? So in the movie, that's how this movie starts off. Like it just it brings you into where we were in 1985, where this blending of kung fu and hip hop kind of meshed together. And in the middle of all that, trying to figure out who we were in the 80s, and are we gangsters over here? Are we b-boys? Are we MCs? Are we like leaning toward some of this kung fu stuff? In the middle of all that, you got this young dude. He's probably like, in the story, he's probably like 19, 20, somewhere in there. And he decides that he is gravitating toward the martial arts, right? And so he takes on this instructor, and this instructor is giving him all this life wisdom and everything else. And so the story becomes this hero's journey where this young dude, he's trying to reach this final level of enlightenment kind of thing, and it's called the glow. And so in his studying to try to attain this high level of enlightenment, as every hero journey goes through all stories, you got to go through all these ups and downs, right? And the instructor kind of, at the beginning of the movie, he kind of lets on what it's going to take for this young man to get through this hero's journey. He's like, yo, you're going to have to go through betrayal and love and struggle, strife. You're going to have some enemies so that you can overcome those enemies, so that you can find what you've always been looking for, right? And so the young dude's confused. The master is like, I've taught you everything I could teach you. Now it's time for you to go discover the rest of these life lessons on your own. And really that is where some of those life lessons took off for me. Like, at a certain point, your parents, they can only teach you so much. And once you've ingested all you can from your parents, it's time to kind of move on. It's time to move on, make your own mistakes, make your own successes, make a name for yourself, so that you can learn the lessons that you need to have as you grow up in life. So I kind of took that even at a young age. Like, I saw that. I don't know if I fully understood it. Matter of fact, I could tell you I didn't fully understand it until much later in life. But there was that story, right? And there was the conflict between the master and the teacher, because the student is like, between the master and the student. The student is like, you haven't taught me everything. There's still so much I don't know. He's like, I promise you, I've given you everything I can. I've given you all the building blocks for you to go through life, and you can figure out the rest. I promise you, you'll be okay. And so that's where the story begins. And we find out this young man, his name is Bruce LeeRoy. That's the nickname that the streets have given him, right? So everybody on the block knows who he is. And they know that he's just about that kung fu life. And but what that does is that sets up his nemesis. Like, it's essentially he gets introduced to his nemesis, because the whole block knows this alias of Bruce LeeRoy. And so his nemesis comes at him. He's like, I heard you think you top stuff, so I'm come to dethrone you. Like, I'm into this kung fu stuff too, but I don't like how you doing it. Like, you all on this peace and love and harmony stuff, and I'm trying to be about it. And so the nemesis name is Shonuff, and he is a character, man. Like, he's one of those dudes. Like, if you ever saw the movie Candyman, that's the actor from Candyman, and he was just this over the top character that was always after LeeRoy, right? And it takes the whole movie as he's going through these ups and downs and lefts and rights, and ends up getting a love interest because he has to rescue her. Like, it was an easy story to tell, because essentially what you were doing is you were just you took all the lessons that the master said he was going to have to learn, and then you just told the story of how he met those requirements to try to figure out how to reach this next level of enlightenment. And so some of the still the most quoted movie lines of all time, right? You got Shonuff. He's like, am I the meanest? Am I the prettiest? Am I the baddest mofo low down around this town? Like, you got Shonuff. He's always on some stuff, right? And you had some other characters that were just over the top. The whole thing was they made the villains of the story over the top, so that you could see and appreciate the serenity of Bruce LeeRoy. And really what that did is it really set up a good versus evil story arc. Like, you couldn't escape the fact that the life of Shonuff was just leading to a life of destruction. Like, you couldn't escape seeing it, that this dude was heading nowhere fast. And so you're rooting there. You had no choice but to root for the good guy of the story. But as you're looking at him, and you're looking at him through the streets, through a street life point of view, Bruce LeeRoy is kind of a chump. And so you kind of want to go for Shonuff, because he's the guy that is so bombastic. He's almost annoying, but you don't want to root for Bruce LeeRoy because you feel like he's just not going to go anywhere. And so you have these contradiction and everything else. Oh, and by the way, the movie is the soundtrack is produced by Berry Gordy. Berry Gordy is kind of he's the brainchild behind the Motown movement. And so if you're not familiar with Motown music, think Marvin Gaye, think the Supremes, like Diana Ross and the Supremes. That whole Detroit era of blues music, of R&B music that came out like during the 60s and 70s. Berry Gordy is the brainchild behind that, and this is kind of his production. So he did the soundtrack. I want to say he produced it, and so the soundtrack is just like crazy. Like you had DeBarge come on there, in the beat and the rhythm of the night. Y'all remember that song? They was dancing in the streets and stuff. You had that song. You had some other like some cool like love music and stuff like that. Berry Gordy, he did a pretty good job telling the story that he wanted to tell, that he had to tell, right? And so as Bruce LeeRoy is going down this journey, he starts to run into problems, right? So some of the problems he runs into are, when is it appropriate to deceive people? So in this one scene, Bruce LeeRoy, he's trying to find this next clue to this puzzle on this hero's quest that he's on, and he goes up to these Asian guys, and they're over the top too. Pizza with bean sprouts. Y'all get it if y'all watch it. So they are hiding the fact that. Let me back up. So Bruce LeeRoy gets this. You know how all the fortune cookies have like the little wise sayings on the inside? His master told him that he could find the guy who writes all these wisdom sayings, and he would be able to tell him the next level of mastery, right? So that's kind of what starts off the quest, and then we start getting sidetracked and everything from there. But what starts off the quest is him looking for this guy, this wise sage, because the master knows, like, if I send him on this journey, he's going to run into life problems on the way, and he'll be able to navigate them from there, which will bring him closer to what he's actually looking for. And so Bruce LeeRoy has to go into this place where supposedly this old wise sage is, but it's being guarded by these three Asian guys, and like I said, they're over the top. And he's like, how do I get inside? Because they won't just let me in. And so he remembers back to one of the old Bruce Lee movies. I think it was Chinese Connection. He thinks back to the old Chinese Connection movie where Bruce Lee disguises himself as a telephone operator. And so Bruce LeeRoy sneaks inside. He disguises himself as a pizza delivery guy because his dad owns a pizza delivery shop. And he goes inside, but there's this conflict that he was raised with this kung fu master to have integrity, to have honesty, to not lie, to not lead this life of deception. But he has to wade through those waters of when is it appropriate for me to deceive people in order to attain my goals. And so the movie doesn't really get into it super hard, but you can see like there's a give and take there, right? There's an ebb and flow. There's something that's there, that the lessons that he learned, there's gray to them. Not everything's black and white all the time, is what he learns throughout this process. So he learns a lesson there, right? He learns a lesson of discovery, of love. And so his love interest ends up being Vanity. You guys, if you grew up in the 80s, you know one of Prince's bands was Vanity Six. She was the lead singer of Vanity Six. So Vanity comes through, and she's a love interest. And so you can see like he learns, like he's been concentrating on his craft for so long that the basic understanding of like how to interact with someone of the opposite sex, it just went over his head. And so he's got this little brother that's always making fun of him. His little brother is this little dude, man, that's like he thinks he's got all these max skills or whatever else, right? And but LeeRoy comes to understand, like, if I can just be myself, if I can just be who I am, then everything else starts to fall into place. And when he realizes, the way he realizes is really cool, because as he's trying to be somebody he's not, he kind of pushes her away a little bit. But then when he's just his authentic self, when he's the man of character, the man of integrity, the man that is going to stick up for people that are less powerful than him, that's what she becomes more attracted to. And so that was a good life lesson for me, man. Like learning how to be your authentic self. And it takes a while. It takes a while for a person to kind of come into the knowledge of who they are and how the world sees them, and then making sure those two are congruent with one another. It takes a long time. It takes some effort to just remain who you are, no matter what the world says about you. Remain your authentic self, and that way, you're not being this false self, because the false self is usually like you have to do so much lying and deceiving and reworking of your character that you don't even become the person that you're trying to be. You become somebody that's totally fake, and it's not attractive. And so I learned that from that movie, which was a really cool lesson. And I learned the value of family in that lesson, and how family is not just your blood, but it also encompasses like everyone you love. Like it's so Bruce LeeRoy had this school, and sure enough rolls up on him, and he he's hurting his people, and everything that Bruce LeeRoy up to this point had been taught was the way of peace. So in the Bible, Jesus talks about how if a man slaps you across the face, turn and give him the other cheek. And Bruce LeeRoy's trying to live that life. He's trying to live a life where I'm not going to be the aggressor. Even if somebody is coming at me, even if somebody is harming people around me, my way of life has to be the way of peace. And man, what he ends up learning through that is that people who are bullies in this life, people who are, they're just evil by nature. Like their desire, the way that they find joy is to hurt other people. When you come across people like that, there's no advantage gained to giving them the other cheek, because they're going to want more and more and more and more. And that's who Shonuff is. Shonuff is a person that I'm going to bait you because I want to destroy you. So I'm going to keep coming after you. And I'm not just going to come after you. I'm going to come after your family. I'm going to come after your friends. I'm going to approach you at work. There's going to be no resting place for you because I want to destroy you. And so he has to learn through the process of interacting with Shonuff that there's a time to fight back. To fight back proportionately, but there is a time to fight back. And I think there's some congruence with that with the book of Ecclesiastes. When Ecclesiastes says there's a time for war, there's a time for peace. And when we try to get those things mixed up, when somebody is declaring war on you and your family, if you're still proclaiming peace, if you're still pursuing peace to the extent that you're allowing the people around you that you love to get hurt, I think that's out of touch with the way God would want us to operate. I am not a pacifist, y'all. I know what Jesus says, and it's probably one of the things that I still struggle with in my Christian walk. Like there's something about if somebody is coming after me with a fight, I'm gonna make sure that they receive one. And that's not me trying to pursue it. That's not me trying to, I'm trying to live the Christian life, and it's one of those things that Jesus is still working on. So I say that I've allowed people to stomp on me in the past without me fighting back, trying to remain peaceful, trying to pursue the way of peace. And there's some of those times that it didn't work out, and I've had to step up, and I've had to roll up on people, and I've had to tell them enough is enough. And so that's what Bruce LeeRoy taught me the man, that there's a proper time when you have done everything you can to live at peace with people, and they still want to come at you, and then there's no more Mr. Nice Guy, and then you kick them in the face like Bruce LeeRoy does. But that's just a few life lessons I learned from that, right? As we're marching down this Emmaus road, here's my proposition to y'all. That way that Bruce LeeRoy was actually pursuing was actually the way of Christ. If you go back and watch the movie and you look at the entire story arc, what the master was trying to teach Bruce LeeRoy at the very beginning was that he didn't need another instructional lesson. He had to realize that everything he needed already existed inside of him. He just had to have an opportunity to bring it out. That was the entire story arc, right? And I was thinking about that because Peter talks about that. 2 Peter 1. Check this out. He says, his divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them we may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. Y'all, I'm telling you, that's exactly the story arc that Bruce LeeRoy had to go through to find his way to the glow. And once he attained the glow, man, he does this scene where he's like, and oh man, for 80s special effects and for it not to be like a big, huge Hollywood budget, man, that scene comes on and his arms are like, they're doing this, but they're oh man, y'all gotta go back and watch it. I'm not doing it justice, but check this out. It says his divine power has granted us everything we already need to live a life of godliness. And that's what the master was trying to tell Bruce LeeRoy. Like everything, he's like, there's one place, because Bruce LeeRoy rose back up on his master and he was like, why'd you send me to find some dude that didn't exist? He was like, he's like, you got me, but you've been looking for this master and you've been looking for this knowledge, and there's one place you have yet to look. And he points at his head and he says, it's there. It's right there. It's already inside of you. That's what Peter is saying to those that are in Christ. He said it's right there. And the reason that we already have it is because Jesus died for us over 2,000 years ago. His death and resurrection happened before we were ever born. And so the resurrection already occurred. He's already given us the life and godliness that we need to live a life of godliness in this life. It's already been given to his people. And it's right there. And we look for godliness from other people. We look for godliness from the church. We think there's life in our sinful patterns, but there's nothing but death there. And Jesus is saying, just like the master was saying, just like Peter is saying in this verse, it's been right there the whole time. Everything you need to live a life of godliness is already right there. And he says, because of that, because you've escaped the corruption that's in this world, because you've escaped the sinful desires. That's what Bruce LeeRoy did. Like, he was confronted with all this rage, and because sure enough was like, he was getting up under his skin, right? He's like, you've escaped all that. You've escaped all that sinful desire. You've escaped the corruption that Shonuff and all his cronies were trying to bring. And for this reason, supplement your faith with virtue. Virtue is that thing where you're like, you're on the up and up. Like you have this goodness about you. You don't have this corruptible thought process. You have a virtuous thought process. Like, you see the best in people. You want to bring out the best in people. That's that virtue. He says, supplement your faith with virtue, with goodness. Supplement that virtue with knowledge. So get that knowledge. Like, always be learning something new. That's kind of you could see the progression of Bruce LeeRoy when he left his master to the end of the movie, when he finally got the glow. Like, he had learned so much. He had gained not just book knowledge, like practical knowledge of life, knowledge of relationships, knowledge of people. So supplement it with knowledge. Supplement that knowledge with self-control. Like, just because somebody gets up in your face doesn't mean you always have to react to them. Or just because you find yourself in a bad situation doesn't mean that you have to just react. Control yourself. That's actually one of the fruits of the Spirit that Christ gives us. And think about that, right? Jesus, at any point of his time on the cross, could have called down legions upon legions of angels to come and wipe out everybody that was there. Matter of fact, he could have wiped out everybody and said, you know what, this is too much. This is too high of a cost. He didn't though. Like, he was a person that modeled what self-control looks like. He looked at, matter of fact, he was so in control of himself. He was so in control of his situation that as people were crucifying him, he starts praying for them to say, Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing. And that's the epitome of self-control. That's what self-control is actually getting at. That because you have the power to control the situation, there's nothing that people can do to you. Bruce LeeRoy had to learn that. He had to learn, there's nothing Shonuff can do to me. I'm Bruce LeeRoy. I got the glow. What you want? He says, supplement that self-control with steadfastness. Like that endurance. Tested, tried, true. And supplement the steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection. He had to learn, like, he had his little brother and he had affection for his little brother, but he had to learn what it was like to protect his little brother. Even though his little brother was a jerk to him for most of the movie, it's like, that didn't matter. You're my brother. He had some other students that wound up being like his little brothers, and he had to learn how to protect them and care for them, let them care for him. That was another big one in the movie. Because he had more skills than some of his students, he didn't always trust them that they could handle situations with him. And so he had to learn, like, not only does friendship encompass what I can do for people, it's also allowing people to do stuff for me. That's what brotherly affection is all about. He said, supplement that brotherly affection with love. This is This is the Christ way. This is the way that we walk through this life and we start to redirect all of our paths to Christ. It's by looking at what Jesus taught us. It's by looking at the way he instituted his church. It's by looking at the way he lived and died on our behalf that we can look at all of life and say, honestly, quite honestly, everything is from him, through him, and to him. This hero's journey that Bruce Lee found himself on was actually the hero's journey that Christ took himself on. Jesus is the originator of this story. Jesus is the one that left his Father in his heavenly dwelling, came to earth as a helpless baby that was full of needs. And he lived this life according to everything that God set up in the law, lived it to perfection. And then, once he had lived a life to perfection, he looked at the people that were supposed to be pointing people to that godliness, that were supposed to be taking their good and honorable gifts and point people to godliness, but instead they were using their good and godly gifts to point people away from the presence of God. Sure enough. And so Jesus looked at those people and said, you guys are hypocrites. You're taking what the good gifts my Father gave you, and you're leading people away. You're a den of robbers. How dare you? How dare you take my people away? Like when Jesus went inside the temple and he overturns the temple, he said, this is supposed to be a house of prayer for all people, but you've turned it into like this ugly den of robbers. Like, what are you guys doing? When we follow Christ with every aspect of our lives, everything becomes about Jesus. Everything. And so, sure enough, is a path to destruction. Yes, he was cool. Yes, he had some, like, he had the chicks. He had some goons that was with him that would do all his bidding. He had the money. Like he had money and he didn't really care about. His path was so bent on destroying Bruce LeeRoy that he ultimately ended up destroying himself. That is the way of the Pharisees. Like the way of the Pharisees, like they see the good gifts that God has given. They take them, especially the Pharisees in Jesus' day. They saw the goodness of Jesus. They saw what he was doing, but they were so concerned of power being taken away from their status that they ultimately set him up. They set him up to take the L for something he didn't even do. And that's what Show Enough tried to do. He tried to destroy Bruce LeeRoy. And the Pharisees tried to destroy Jesus. But ultimately, what happens is when we have virtue and knowledge and self-control, steadfastness, godliness, brotherly affection, and love in our lives that are constantly increasing. Verse 8 says, if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. As we walk through this life, if we're increasing in all these things, if we're increasing in our knowledge and self-control and steadfastness and all those things, right? If we're increasing in those, if we desire them from God, if we're constantly pursuing them, it leads us right to the heart of Christ, because that's who Jesus was. Jesus modeled all these things, and as we pursue them, we get our way closer and closer to Christ. And of course, in movies, especially movies in the 80s, there's always a happy ending. The bad guy never really won in the 80s. It was always the good guy story, and that is the end of our story. If you turn back to the back of this book, you'll see the good guy wins. And I don't know if that's probably a spoiler alert too for those of you who may not read it. But Jesus wins in the end. Evil cannot prevail when something as good as Christ steps onto the scene. But that's this road to Emmaus through watching The Last Dragon. Man, I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. I have fun talking about it. I'm so jazzed about it. I haven't watched that movie in a couple years. I think I'm about to go home and watch it because I just want to remind myself of all those good times that I had watching those movies. But hopefully y'all are doing well. What do y'all think, man? What was your favorite movie growing up when you were coming up? How does that movie lead you to Christ? Maybe we could chop it up sometime, talk about it. And man, hope y'all are doing well. And I will see y'all the next episode, man. I have fun. Hope y'all have fun. Until next time, grace and peace. Yo, and just because I know I got Star Wars fans, today, of course, is May the 4th. May the 4th be with you.